and welcome to the third day of Climate Week at Penn. My name is Osek Eke. I am the Director for Global and Local Service Learning Programs at Penn Engineering. And today we have an exciting panel that will discuss carbon offsets as part of a way to mitigate climate change. To guide us through this panel discussion, which is a multidisciplinary group of experts from Penn and from also the industry, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today. Our moderator for today is Professor Simon Richter. Simon is a class of 1942 professor of German, and he's also the chair of the Climate Week at Penn. So we're very gracious and happy that he could join us to moderate this panel. Simon is also a chair of the Policy and Subcommittee of the Faculty Senate Select Committee on the Institutional Response to the Climate Emergency. So you can see that at the highest level of the university, Simon is involved in conversations about what our institution can do to mitigate the effects of climate change. So Simon, welcome, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Osek. Welcome to this webinar on carbon offsets for university-sponsored air travel and a vision for West Philadelphia. Let me explain the webinar's purpose. In January of this year, Penn announced that Penn Purchasing, in consultation with experts from the Weitzman School of Design, the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and Facilities and Real Estate Services, had been developing a program through which Penn will purchase carbon offsets to help neutralize emissions from Penn's air travel. This is great news. Penn sponsors a lot of air travel, and this is a significant step on Penn's part. It's also a great opportunity to invest in one form of climate mitigation or another. And that's where this webinar comes into the picture. We are pleased and proud of Penn's initiative. And in the spirit of collaboration already shown by Penn's consulting experts in design, engineering, and facilities, we would like to contribute a vision for how to invest the carbon offsets in West Philadelphia for Penn to consider. During this hour, you will learn about the impact of air travel on climate change from Megan Ryerson. Megan, could you wave? Who is the UPS Chair of Transportation and an Associate Professor of City and Regional Planning and Electrical and Systems Engineering. She's authored numerous manuscripts on aviation and climate change, bringing hidden inefficiencies in the aviation industry to the forefront of climate policy. She works closely with Penn Sustainability to reduce Penn's air travel emissions and is currently serving on PennDOT's COVID Recovery Task Force. Benjamin Pierce will help us understand what carbon offsets are and what the Penn plan entails. Benjamin is Professor of Computer and Information Science. He chairs an ad hoc committee on climate change within ACM, and that is the Association for Computing Machinery. And this spring, he served as executive editor for ACM's task force on virtual conferences. He's the author or co-author of a report on how scientific societies can use carbon offsets. We will then turn to Bill Bram for an assessment of Penn's options. Bill is Professor of Architecture at Penn. He directs the program in environmental building design, and he is chair of the Committee on the Institutional Response to the Climate Emergency. Finally, we will ask three experts to help us construct a possible path to connect carbon offsets with climate-centered neighborhood development in West Philadelphia. I'll start with Steve Luxton, who is the Executive Director of the Energy Coordinating Agency in Philadelphia. ECA provides energy assistance and services to low-income residents throughout Philadelphia. Then I'll consult with Andy Humler, who is Senior Lecturer in the School of Engineering and Applied Science. Andy teaches courses on energy, climate, and electricity. He worked in the City of Philadelphia's Energy Office during the Green administration and went on to a 20-year career with PECO Energy and Exelon. He's on the board of directors of the ECA, having served as its president from 2014 to 2017. And to wrap things up, I'll ask Regina Bynum to fill in the picture from the perspective of the communities of West Philadelphia. Regina is the Director of Teaching and Learning at the Netter Center for Community Partnerships, helping to academically align Penn programming at various university-assisted community school sites throughout West Philadelphia. She also works to support the implementation of environmental science academically based community service courses in an effort to provide mutually transformative experiences for youth to engage in real-world problem solving for environmental health concerns. As a native Southwest Philadelphian, former teacher, and director of many community-based programs, Regina is familiar with the importance of education, community empowerment, and advocacy to effect positive, sustainable change. So my thanks to all of you for joining us and for contributing and to this collaborative effort and communicating in dialogue with the University of Pennsylvania about this important topic. Megan, I'm going to start with you. I see you have a fabulous backdrop there that places us in the Netherlands with two modes of transportation that are less carbon intensive than air transportation. So about a year ago, you presented a lecture in the 1.5-minute climate lecture series with the very provocative title, Time to Stop Flying. So I'm going to start with that question. How does air transportation contribute to climate change?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Air transportation contributes to climate change from the combustion of jet fuel. The combustion of jet fuel produces the carbon, which becomes CO2. Globally, aviation contributes about 2.5% to 3% of all greenhouse gas emissions. When we break that down to all of transportation's greenhouse gas emissions, aviation is about 12% of that. Now, I think it's important to also think about the sort of secondary effects of air transportation. And one of these is to think about the warming potential of emitting carbon at altitude. When the aircraft emit at altitude, when you add that to the warming potential of contrails and other events sort of at high altitude, the actual percent of greenhouse gas emissions that aviation contributes is closer to 5%. The warming potential makes the sort of intensity more than double. Also, aviation has a lot more effects than just the aircraft taking off and flying. Many airports and cities are the largest trip generators in their region. Right? In Los Angeles, LAX is the largest trip generator. People driving to and from the airport for jobs, for travel, for logistics, and as logistics centers. Aviation and airports also have the effect of the degradation of environmental justice and climate justice. People who live around airports are disproportionately low income, and they're disproportionately affected by the emissions of aircraft and by all of us driving to and from the airport and the aircraft taking off. To put this 5% of global emissions in perspective, the average person emits about 19 tons of CO2 a year that they're personally responsible for. If I were to get on a plane right now and go to San Francisco round trip, I would be responsible for 1 ton of CO2 emissions just from that trip. If I were to get on a plane now and go round trip to Asia, that would be about 2 tons. So one long distance flight is actually a really big portion of the emissions that an individual might be is responsible for the duration of a year.
All right, thank you for that very comprehensive picture. What I realize is that if one person like you produces 1 ton traveling to San Francisco and back, there must be many, many people in the world who don't fly. And in fact, it's a minority, let's say a relative minority, that produces an awful lot of carbon through their flying. And the university and the employees of the university, of course, make up a part of that. Has COVID-19 made a big difference?
So my answer to that is yes and no. Yes, there are certainly fewer flights with halts on international travel, and many fewer international flights. Also, just many fewer people traveling for business and leisure, and so there's certainly fewer flights. However, the number of flights is actually artificially high when you compare it to demand. That's particularly true when we think of domestic flights. And the reason for that is due to the federal CARES Act that provided $40 billion to the airlines in recovery stimulus, and that was allocated back in March 2020, this year. The requirements of the CARES Act were such that the airlines needed to preserve their network in order to receive their share of $40 billion. So an airline could, for example, reduce the number of flights they had from New York to Miami from 8 to 2 a day, but they still had to keep a presence in every single market in which they had a flight before March 2020. So an aircraft still emits carbon if there's nobody on it. And for continuing today, there are many flights traveling around that have very, very few passengers on them, and they're flying because of the requirements of that $40 billion that was allocated to the airlines in the CARES Act. There's also the other effect that the airlines are advertising more sparsely populated flights. People want to be spread out. They don't want the middle seat taken. They want a whole row to themselves. That's actually become part of the marketing plan. And the way that we reduce the CO2 impact of flights is by packing those flights. And so COVID has had immediate effects in terms of dipping demand and dipping the number of flights, however, not to the extent that it would have had there not been the CARES Act requirements. But I think in the long term, we can see that people will want to be spread, and that could actually keep the number of flights increasing. That could keep the number of flights increasing higher than demand.
Well, yeah. Okay, at some point we're going to get past COVID, and I imagine many people are hoping that they'll be able to travel again, to go on vacation, and that and get back on airplanes. What are the sort of trends for the near future and maybe for the middle term in the US and in the world? Do you think air travel in connection with working to mitigate climate change is going to decrease, or is it likely to increase despite that?
So before COVID, air travel and air travel emissions were increasing. There are so many trips that have no other replacement mode. And also I'll say that national governments have a focus, have a motivation to keep the supply of flights high. A lot of national competition takes place in the form of air travel, and nations are also very reluctant to penalize their own airlines because they want their airlines to flourish. It's part of national pride, and it's part of national economy. That also is true at the very local level. Every individual city wants to have a big, flourishing airport to lure businesses, to lure development. Actually, when Amazon put out their RFP for their second headquarters, they actually said in the RFP, we are looking for a city with a very high number of direct flights to many locations, right? That just puts to the forefront how important it is for cities, for national governments to have high levels of air travel. So we have a lot of forces. We have economic forces. We have sort of national interest keeping the supply of flights, high, and a lot of motivation to keep that number of flights high. I'll say one thing that I do see in the future is a lot of substitution from short flights to ground transportation. I think that this was already happening before COVID, and now with COVID will be accelerated, people feeling more comfortable in their own car, people not wanting to connect, and taking a long drive either to their destination or to a larger airport. So I do think that we'll see a trend of increasing long distance flights and decreasing shorter distance flights.
Okay, that doesn't sound too encouraging.
No.
No. So one last question, a really quick one before we move on to Benjamin. Will zero carbon or low carbon air travel ever be possible, do you think?
Jet fuel has a lot of wonderful properties for air transportation, and the incredibly unfortunate property that it produces, a very high level of carbon. Jet fuel has a very high energy density. It does not freeze at altitude. It has easy storage in the wings of aircraft, and it burns off during flight, which means that the aircraft at the end of the flight is much lighter than it started. And so when the aircraft actually burns less fuel as it flies because it's getting lighter. So jet fuel has a lot of very important properties for air transportation. And we have an entire infrastructure to deliver jet fuel to all of our airports. The alternatives to jet fuel are being researched, but they're not far enough along to say that they're going to be a reality anytime soon. Batteries are very heavy. They don't have a very high energy density, and they don't necessarily have the same properties in terms of, not freezing and easy wing storage and so on. There was recently a very promising battery-powered flight for a very small aircraft, a small general aviation aircraft, which is very promising, but it doesn't scale up because of the energy density, issue. Other airlines and researchers and the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, have been researching fuel blends. Can we blend in biofuel, right? Can we blend in sustainable materials to jet fuel and have some of the same properties? There have been some successful test flights. They also have issues related to energy density and freezing. The freezing at altitude is a big issue. And I think finally getting the logistics set up to distribute an alternative fuel would be a massive undertaking. Retrofitting existing aircraft, making new aircraft, changing the entire logistics distribution center system. There would have to be widespread acceptance that whatever the new fuel, whatever the new technology was, that it would be universally accepted. Right. And
Okay.
that's a really, really big hurdle. And I'll just end by saying that's why the title of my 1.5-minute lecture was "It's Time to Stop Flying." I think that to reduce our emissions from air transportation, we really need to rely on technology the way we're doing right now. We need to scrutinize every trip. We need to fly. We need to fly less.
That's a perfect segue to Benjamin, because Benjamin has given that a great deal of thought. Thank you, Megan, for your insight into the transportation picture. It deserves a webinar in its own right, I think. But let's turn now to Benjamin. Benjamin, the first time you and I met, I remember you asked me if I offset my carbon, and I really appreciated the fact that you put that out there. So it was something where I wanted to, but I wasn't yet, and that conversation was very helpful. Benjamin, you have focused a lot of attention on this for yourself, for the university, and also for the association that you work with. And so I'm happy to turn to you to ask you, first of all, what are carbon offsets?
Okay, so carbon offsets, Simon, are a very simple proposition, basically, and then some complexity gets wrapped around it. So the simple version is this. Suppose that I am trying to reduce my carbon footprint. but I'm not quite there yet. So I know that this year I'm going to emit a ton, say, of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And suppose that you have something that you can do that will either pull a ton of greenhouse gas out of the air, like planting some trees, or else can help avoid emitting some greenhouse gases, like perhaps you're interested in building a methane capture plant for a landfill. But you need money to do this, say $20 to capture that ton of carbon or avoid emitting it to actually make it happen. So the exchange is, I give you $20, I do my thing, you do your thing, and the net effect on the atmosphere is zero. The more complicated version involves more players, so there are vendors that act as intermediary. You and I don't have to spend a lot of energy finding each other. All of the providers get gathered together, and then all of the consumers of the offsets can easily find them. There are organizations that vet offset projects to make sure that the carbon reductions are real and permanent and would not have happened without the injection of money, and so on. But this is the basic story.
Great. Okay. Well, from the fact that you used you as an example and talked about an exchange between you and me, it sounds like this is something that individuals can do. Do you think individuals can and should offset their carbon from air travel and from, I guess, from other things, home energy use?
Absolutely. So individuals should offset their carbon, and organizations, as we're discussing today, should offset their carbon. So let's talk about air travel. The picture, there are lots of sides to the picture, but today is about air travel. So let's talk about air travel. Air travel is interesting for me as an academic, because when I look at my personal carbon footprint, air travel is like 2/3 of it. Moreover, it's the 2/3 that I have the most control over. The rest is things like energy to heat my house and the food that I eat and things like that are much more difficult to reduce. Whereas that other 2/3, I really have some direct control over. So let me echo first of all what Megan said, which is the best is to avoid traveling. And there are lots of reasons for that. She gave some. Another that I would add is that there aren't enough offsets. So even if you blanketed the whole surface of the earth in trees, et cetera, people have done these calculations. You can offset some significant part of present day emissions, but you can't do it all. So if everybody tries to achieve to maintain their present lifestyle and present habits with offsetting, then economics tells us the price will go to infinity. So this is not a situation we want to be in. We need to actually reduce emissions. So step one, don't travel. I want to insert a footnote to that step one, which is right now we have a golden opportunity going on, and it's the golden lining of the COVID crisis, which is right now people are not traveling. We're finding other ways to do it. For example, we're finding another way to do it right now, and I find this very interesting. So all of my spare energy and then some has been for the past 6 months going into virtual conferences. It's not today's topic, so I'm not going to go on a big riff about it, but I really think people that are interested in addressing air travel as a carbon problem should be working on virtual conferences, because we have a year or so to make them really good and compelling. And the better we make them, the more people will not go back.
Okay, thank you
So,
for
enough about that.
We need to hear that. Could you tell?
Let me just quickly finish answering your question.
Okay.
So rightly or wrongly, people do feel they have to travel. And then carbon offsets come into play. They are not a panacea, but they have good effects on offsetting, on putting the money where people are reducing carbon in the atmosphere now. That's huge. And putting a price on our activities for ourselves makes us think and makes us change our habits. So those are two big reasons.
Okay. I'm going to jump now to Penn's plan, which was announced in January.
Mhm.
Could you tell us about Penn's plan to offset carbon? How detailed is it? What does it entail?
So it's still under construction, but it's getting to the point where it's rather detailed. So the steps are this. So first of all, we need to estimate Penn's current carbon footprint, and a lot of work has gone into that. There are very beautiful diagrams that I won't take time showing, but since we're focused on air travel, you find out that going forward, air travel is about 10% of the problem. So you put a number on how much carbon we're emitting, and put tags on it, and air travel gets a tag of a certain size. So there are some number of tons that have to be offset if we're going to get to zero. You then look around for a good offset vendor, and we've done a bunch of research in that area. We selected 3 that we thought were high quality and had the right kinds of projects to offer. We interviewed them, and we're in the middle of a written back and forth. We are quickly going to be at the point of selecting one of the 3 to be a partner to work with, and then we'll make a concrete proposal to the university that will go to university leadership for final decisions. Longer term. So at the moment we're working with established providers because we want to get this off the ground quickly.
Yeah.
Longer term, we could think about putting the same funds, the same sort of carbon tax into projects locally, and that's really what a lot of this panel discussion is about.
Exactly. I think you just made a very important point. And it's good to know where the university is right now and that they're looking to act quickly, but that there's also a long-term perspective, and that's something that our conversation today perhaps can inform. All right, Benjamin, thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to Bill. Bill, as I've gotten to know you over the years, I realize that you more than anyone else probably knows where Penn's energy comes from, where it goes, what it's used for. You know how to measure it. You are the go-to Penn energy guy, I would say. And so I want to ask you, how has Penn's approach to carbon offsets evolved over time? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Bill.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks for organizing this event. And I will say there is an energy team at FREST that knows all the answer to all those questions as well. But certainly among the faculty, that might be true. Let me give tell a little bit of a story, which is sometimes an easier way to think about these things, about Penn's relationship or choices about carbon offsets over the last, gosh, now it's been 15 years. So before Penn had a carbon action plan, back when it was doing, we prepared something called a sustainability plan. And part of that was the then VP of facilities saying, I really want to buy wind power, I've talked to people. And so people got together, agreed, this sounded like a great thing. And Penn signed a contract with a local wind producer, which meant that they would buy power from them for a certain number of years. And that money would mean that the wind producer could build new wind turbines in Pennsylvania. So it was local. You could kind of get a picture of them. It was like 25% of Penn's electricity, and ultimately became something on the order of 10 to 15% of Penn's carbon footprint. So everybody felt really good about that. Real turbines, kind of local, Penn's initiative made it all happen. But the terms of the contract, and I don't have the exact dates and times, but it started in 2005, but sometime after 3 to 5 years, the contract released them from buying it in that format, and they were able to sell what became Pennsylvania Renewable Energy Credits. Stay with me for a second here, and buy national renewable energy credits, which were much less expensive. So literally with a market transaction, Penn was suddenly able to double or triple in some years the amount of carbon that they were offsetting. And that started people feeling like maybe this wasn't as you know, we trusted the accounting, but it didn't feel as real as we wanted it to be. And maybe I'll add to what Benjamin was saying about offsets and say, first of all, you can't offset everything, right? If everybody went out and tried to offset everything, nothing would happen. And so Penn's approach always was, we want to do as much by reduction, by efficiencies, by all the techniques by which we can reduce the footprint, and then we will understand that you can't get to zero, so we'll offset the rest. And so that began what probably was a decade of, are these RECs going to really do, are we really going to trust these RECs when it comes to the end in 2042 when we've hit zero and want to do it? And literally, along with the peer schools who you know, the university talks to a lot, everybody began to feel like buying RECs on the market wasn't as substantial, or it just didn't make people feel like they were doing the job that they wanted to do, even though we trust the accounting. So there's been a renewed effort, and some of this has been imposed or come through that committee that's been looking at offsets for air travel, to look for offsets that are as local as they possibly can be, that they're verifiable, that they're verified by some third-party group, so you know what you're getting, and 3, that they're additional. And that first wind power purchase is a good example. Because of what you're doing, something new gets done in the world, rather than just, I'm trading on something that somebody else is already doing. And I'll just finish by saying, so we're at a moment now, you know, Penn is reducing lots of things. It's done this solar power purchase, which honestly, technically, if you want to think about it that way, is a form of offset, because the panels aren't on Penn's campus, but they are directly connected to Penn for whatever the term of that contract is, 15 or 25 years. But Penn currently is purchasing, well, it's currently obtaining one form of offset, which again came through a contractual arrangement with its steam supplier, and they are investing in or buying RECs for capturing methane from landfill. So there's a local good, and as long as it's verifiable, we feel it's correct. So let me just finish by saying, obviously the principle here is reduce, 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 and then when you can't get rid of, you will need to offset in some way until we find ways to do without it. And the two things, if you look at over the big picture, the two things that will be on Penn's plate in 2042, and we will be working on that between now and then, is the steam that it currently uses to heat its buildings, and air travel are the two big pieces.
Great. Okay. And so it sounds like you would recommend that Penn look at local investments for its offsets.
Yeah, and maybe let me add a little bit bigger thing, because, you know, just the nature of this seminar, we're sort of going from, you know, talking about market-based offsets to then projects we might do in West Philadelphia. And frankly, we are going to need all of them. We're going to need, it's actually quite a lot of work, as we'll hear from the coming speakers, to do this work. Like if we, you know, successfully renovate a typical home in West Philadelphia and solarize it and so forth, we're maybe setting off 1 or 2 metric tons a year. Penn currently has about 300,000 it emits, and will be down to somewhere 50 to 100,000. So we're going to need all of these to make this work.
Okay, great. I should also mention that Patricia Espinosa, the executive director of UNFCCC, mentioned Penn's power purchase agreement this morning.
Oh, good. Oh, nice.
So she was aware of that too. Okay, thank you very much, Bill. Now I'm going to turn to our 3 experts to ask them about their thoughts, their ideas for a vision for West Philadelphia investments, sort of along the lines that Bill was suggesting. So local. I'm going to start with Steve Luxton, who is from the Energy Coordinating Agency. Steve, welcome. And let me start by asking you, what is the ECA? What do you do?
Great question. Thank you, Simon. The ECA, or Energy Coordinating Agency, we go by either name, is a unique model to very loosely borrow from Pirates and Penzance. It is the very model of a modern environmental agency in a very urban environment. And we really are, I think when the dust settles, our primary goals are environmental justice and social justice. And we do that through various means, at the agency. But the concept of ECA actually comes from one of our board members and one of our panelists, Andy Humler. Very forward-thinking, progressive-minded, socially conscious for sure, is really what started this agency. And best I know, throughout the country, there's nothing quite like ECA, at the risk of immodesty, and I'm really not taking the credit for that at the same time. So that's what this amazing agency does, and as we'll discover in my my talk, how we can also impact carbon offsets as well.
Okay, so how specifically does the ECA work with residents? I understand that there's an energy efficiency solarization side, but there's also job training, right?
Yes, it's sort of morphed. It started out in the mid 80s. Actually, it was driven by a crisis where unfortunately the local energy provider was shutting off. This is pre-moratorium that the PUC has mandated. Shutting off services in low income and moderate income households in the dead of winter. And obviously that sounds incredibly unfair and just shouldn't happen. But that was the drive for it. And we've gone from being an agency that advocated for folks not losing their gas service to an agency that would make these low-income households, which tend to be, on average, in greater disrepair than your average house for obvious economic reasons. These houses, if they were improved from an energy perspective, they reduce their energy loads. And so ECA ventured into the energy efficiency retrofit business, which is commonly referred to as weatherization throughout the country. Heavily funded, but not solely funded by DOE, and most utilities are also mandated to run some level of energy efficiency assistance programs for their low to moderate income ratepayers as well. So we morphed into weatherization, and in the early 2000s, ECA acquired a very large 58,000 square foot facility in the most challenged area in all of Philadelphia, and that says a lot. And it was a beaten up, old, tired warehouse that we retrofitted with the grace of a very generous donation of $1 million. We turned it into as you can see in the backdrop, a state-of-the-art training lab. It's a diamond in the rough, as many people commonly say. And we've really geared our training towards the economically disadvantaged, and lately with a real focus, returning citizens, because there is a real, almost obscene condition where 60%, over 2/3 of folks that are released from incarceration will end up in trouble again in some way or fashion. So, and it's obvious, they don't have the tools to be able to make a living, which in turn will allow them to hopefully continue in a more positive path. So we have growing programs also for returning citizens as well. But the core of ECA, and where I started out as a construction engineer building photomats 40 years ago, and now it's got into this amazing opportunity to impact the environment and lives at the same time. Now we offer training and, of course, a very robust weatherization program where we've, since we hung out our flag for weatherization, we've weatherized in Philadelphia exclusively about 45,000 homes.
Well, that's an incredible contribution because, of course, that means energy savings, both in terms of carbon, but also savings for those families who use less energy. I'm going to shift now, since Andy is a past president of ECA, to Andy and talk with you, Andy, about how could the model of ECA be brought to West Philadelphia? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Thanks for organizing this, because I think, and excuse the pun, I think this idea could fly. Just starting here, the basic idea would be to create carbon offsets. Penn would invest in weatherization, solarization projects in West Philadelphia, or as Bill Braham has talked about, it might be a lot more in Philadelphia because we're going to need a lot of these offsets. The thing that's I find really interesting here is that this is doable. This is totally doable. We have the organizational capability to do it. ECA, after 30 years of experience, has developed the smarts in terms of how to do this, has developed the organization that's capable of doing this. When I first became really interested in this concept, I heard the phrase that you only needed to be smarter than a 2x4. And I thought, well, how hard can that be? Well, it's a lot more difficult. And a lot of people have put a tremendous amount of effort into thinking how to weatherize, solarize, and improve the energy efficiency of our residences, particularly low-income residences. So there's the experience there that can carry us a long way going forward. And taking that a step further, there's actually an interesting partnership evolving between ECA and the work Bill Braham is doing at the sort of the high-tech end, and Steve Luxton is to some degree at the low-tech end. So there's great opportunities here. Going forward, is this a good idea? Do I think this would work? Yes, it's expensive. We could buy market-based offsets, the one that Ben Pierce is pursuing right now. We could buy them a lot cheaper, but they really don't provide the local benefits, the hyper-local benefits that would be afforded by investing in weatherization and solarization. And those I call them collateral benefits as opposed to collateral damages, which we incur with other energy strategies globally. But they're manyfold. Not only are there climate benefits, there are health benefits. ECA, when they go in to weatherize a home, they pay attention to things like mold. You don't want to weatherize or air seal a house that has mold inside it. So that's addressed. It certainly creates jobs, a lot of jobs, and interesting career paths. Trainees come into ECA, they learn how to do simple things like caulk a window. They go from there to learning how to repair heating systems. And from there, some of them learn how to manage very large HVAC systems. This is kind of aside from the solar training. Their housing preservation benefits, their neighborhood preservation benefits. ECA started not only to do these projects on a home-by-home basis, but a block-by-block basis, where we get big economies of scale, and basically develop the community and preserve a community right there, block by block. So yeah, a lot of benefits. And also these benefits, they not only address climate issues, but they also address climate justice and social justice issues.
Right. Okay. I really appreciate the way that you've sketched that, Andy. It's a holistic vision. It has to do with health, with social equity, with jobs. It's a really a wonderful vision. I know you've you've taught an ABC course with the Netter Center that was focused on energy and so on. And I'm actually going to use that as a springboard now, because I'm looking at the time, to get to Regina, because Regina works at the Netter Center. And I think that Regina can help us understand so Regina, like me, you are one of the only people here who is not an energy or transportation expert, but you're a West Philadelphia and community expert. And all of these efforts mean nothing if it does not sort of mesh with the community. So let me first start with a question to you. How does the Netter Center look at the concept and practice of partnerships between Penn and West Philadelphia communities?
Thank you so much. Well, to answer your question, the Netter Center sees the partnerships between Penn and West Philadelphia as intertwined, connected, and collaborative. And I want to just unpack that a little bit. We connect with the community in a variety of ways through our university-assisted community school partnerships. We're in 9 schools throughout West Philadelphia. We connect through our academically based community service courses, which you've just mentioned. We connect through our community advisory board. And we really try to maintain a democratic approach to this. After all, it's all West Philadelphia. We want all of West Philadelphia to be healthy. And of course, beyond, right, in this city. because Penn is in West Philadelphia, ultimately the healthier Penn is, the healthier the community is, and the healthier the community is, the healthier Penn is. Through our UX programming, or University Assisted Community School work, and our ABCS work, we basically engage thousands of Penn students in various academic, civic engagement opportunities, academic engagement. And so if you think about the condition of our school buildings, if we're thinking about ways to go into carbon offset programs and partnerships in West Philadelphia, we want our students, our Penn students, to be healthy. We want our community to be healthy. We want our K-12 students to be healthy, and our families and our teachers, our school partners. So we approach this work as really realizing that a democratic, collaborative approach is the way to go. That's how we've been able to sustain this work for so many years, and that's how we're gonna hopefully expand this initiative, and that's how we are able to really sustain this work. And in addition, you know, other universities are looking at this great approach. So because Penn is an anchor institution in Philadelphia, as in particular in West Philadelphia, the more that we can invest into the community, I think the more valuable we are in terms of how the community sees us, the more that we can leverage not only this resource with carbon offsets, but all of our academic resources, the resources of what our students can offer the community, and of course, continue to learn from what the community can offer us as well.
Yeah, so I'm happy to think in the bigger picture. And you started to list some of the opportunities that are there. What other opportunities do you see for Penn to make climate and environment related investments in West Philadelphia in consultation with communities and organizations?
Well, there are endless opportunities, right? If we connect through Netter's University Assisted Community School programming, we automatically reach thousands of families. I mean, if you think about how many families are in one school, but we're in 9 schools, right? And even beyond. So the impact that we could have is almost endless. We could expand academically based community service courses like Professor Himmler's course into more schools. We could possibly connect with high school CTE programs or career and technical education programs where students can really learn more about weatherization, learn more about renewable energy sources, and then take that knowledge back into their communities and even into a future career. We have some pipeline programming where students, you know, they learn, they kind of get on a bit of a career path. In the summer, they get a stipend through the Philadelphia Youth Network. So there are various ways that we could engage and expand this initiative. I think that we could connect with, in addition to the Netter Center, other community-facing entities even within Penn. So we can maybe do some workshops at the African American Resource Center. We could try to connect with Solarize Philly, maybe do some more projects with the ECA. So I think the opportunities are endless, you know, to engage in Philadelphia and West Philadelphia and beyond. But I think it just has to be very collaborative, and it has to be a sincere approach to the work.
Sincere and consistent and long lasting.
Yes.
We are at the 11:48 mark. Audience, you are welcome to pose questions to any of the panelists. Please use the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen. And while you're formulating questions and sending them in, I'm going to turn to Andy. I think, Andy, you wanted to say something with regard to what Regina was saying.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit more detail to what Regina is saying and give an example. Just last spring, the engineering school, with a lot of help from the Netter Center, put together a course where we had Penn students, a group of Penn students, go up to the Energy Coordinating Agency, which is in West Kensington, located in the poorest zip code and the poorest city in America, the poorest large city in America. And we had them take several training courses in weatherization, healthy homes, and career pathways. They came back to Penn, added a little STEM methodology to that, and then went back out to West Philadelphia High School and Sayre High School. This kind of got interrupted by the pandemic, but the initial courses that we had taught by Penn students that were only 2 or 3 years older than the high school students were really well received. And I think these students took that message home, and this energy efficiency approach and message is getting out into the community in different ways. And as Regina said, there are kind of endless ways to continue that effort.
Okay, Climate Week has put an emphasis, I think, one of our emphases has been on the West Philadelphia Penn partnership. As part of that, Netter Center has put on is putting on two teach-ins where voices from the community are speaking to the issues connected to climate and environment from their perspective. One of them was yesterday. Regina participated in that. And I think there's one today as well. Regina, do you want to say a quick word about what is in store today? I see your hand, Bill. I'll turn to you in just a moment.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to do this. So today at 4 o'clock, we are going to continue part 2 of our teach-in, where we're going to hear from some local agencies to learn more about the different aspects of how we can keep the environment safe and healthy. We're going to hear from the Philadelphia Orchard Project. We're going to hear a little bit from our University Assisted Community School approach with Anna Belfons, our Netter Emerson Fellow, who also participated yesterday, along with one of our teachers, Ms. Green from Lee Elementary. So we're really excited about that. We're going to hear from Solarize Philly. We'll hear a little more from the ECA as well. And we're going to hear from the Cobbs Creek Environmental Center. In addition, immediately after those presentations, we're going to have a bit of a roundtable so that we can unpack and kind of dive a little deeper into really having a rich dialogue about what we can do next together, what we can expect from Penn, what can we ask from Penn, and just, what can we do collaboratively to strengthen, the things that need to happen going forward to negate, the carbon footprint that we've made in the community. So we're really excited about that. We're hoping that everyone that's tuned in here can tune in later at 4 o'clock. So thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Regina. Okay, Bill.
I was only going to point out that there was a question in the chat, but Benjamin has already answered it by text. So.
Okay, you beat me to the punch there, Benjamin. All right. In that case, I think I'm going to ask you all, you've listened to each other. What are your final thoughts, or not final thoughts, thoughts today on listening to the other panelists? Megan, you're nodding your head.
I am. I think quite a few things that were said really resonated with me. And one is, what Benjamin said, which is we can't offset our way out of this problem completely. And that's why when I think of reducing air transportation emissions, I like to think of a suite of solutions that all have different impact and together have a really significant impact. And so I like to think about offsetting, reducing travel, mode substitution, right? Switching to more efficient modes, switching to electrified buses, and so on. And how can we put these together to come up with a comprehensive package of solutions that really reduces our impact? I also think what we talked about with Regina and the Netter Center, I think the community aspect and thinking about climate justice and thinking about how efforts to reduce the impact of air transportation emissions from Penn and more broadly, these efforts can lift others up, right? How can we put these two concepts together and make reducing emissions an opportunity to better the life of, to better lives, to better communities that particularly that Penn is a part of? And so I love the idea of having initiatives to recoup some funds from heavy travelers at Penn and use that for community sustainability projects, right? And to raise awareness, raise funds regarding reducing air transportation's environmental impact, and use it to start to rectify some of the climate and environmental justice issues that are really facing, Penn's neighbors. I think that would be a really incredibly powerful new layer to our partnership.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions that have come in. Neil is asking, what do you all think about carbon capture and sequestration? Could that be implemented for air transportation? Bill.
I can weigh in, not an expert on air transportation, but when people talk about carbon capture, they're often talking about two different or two related things. Natural carbon capture, trees, wetlands, and so on, do pull carbon out of the atmosphere. They do it, obviously, they've been doing it forever, and they do it with environmental energies. But it's you really need a lot of trees and a lot of grassland and a lot of wetland to make it happen. The other is using some kind of machine. Carbon scrubbers are common in submarines. They're used in space stations and so forth. That really, that's an expensive technology, and it also works best. In fact, it only works even remotely economically if the carbon is very concentrated. So simply putting a device out in your backyard to try and pull carbon out of the atmosphere would be so prohibitively expensive if you attempted to do it with running electric motors and things to run the device. So the one place where people look at that is putting it at sources like power plants, where there's a lot of carbon in the exhaust stream. That has been, you hear mythical talk about clean coal. Clean coal is the idea that you're putting a carbon scrubber on a coal-fired power plant, which, by the way, is technically perfectly possible, but you're, in a sense, putting a huge energy tax onto that coal plant in order to pull the carbon out. So it becomes, at least in the current market, prohibitively expensive. I'm going to let Megan pick up the other one, but I can't imagine that any device that's capable of pulling carbon out of the exhaust stream from a jet engine would do anything other than keep the plane on the ground, because it would be so heavy and not aerodynamic.
Megan, could you combine that with the second question, which is, could hydrogen fuel be a possible alternative?
Absolutely. Hydrogen fuel, like a number of the blends, it has been successful in pilot flights for small aircraft in very controlled environments. So it is possible that hydrogen fuel could power small aircraft for very limited flights. I think that it's really important when we think about alternative fuels that we have to think about how an aircraft physically stores and circulates fuel across the aircraft, and how we get all of this alternative fuel out to the hundreds and thousands of airports across the world. And so right now, the way that hydrogen fuel would need to be stored, our aircraft, they're not designed for hydrogen fuel. So we would need to retrofit the pipes and the sort of fueling infrastructure in all of our aircraft. That's not a small undertaking. I'm not saying it's certainly technically possible, but the money and the will, I think that these are things that we are lacking in order to do retrofits. I will say there are also a lot of historical situations where the FAA has said to the airlines, we're going to implement this new technology, you need to invest in it. The airlines invest in it, and then the FAA doesn't invest in the technology. So the airlines are very reluctant to invest in new technology. So there need to be some very strong program that had all of the aircraft retrofitted. And I think we have to think about the distribution systems. How would we be distributing this kind of fuel? Would it be distributed widely? Would it be very limited different airports where hydrogen fuels go between? They're big questions. They're solvable questions, but they're very expensive and logistical and I think long-term question. So technically possible, very, very challenging.
Thank you, Megan. We're at the 11:59 mark. We have another question there. I don't think we're going to have time to get to it, but this question points in the direction of a continuing conversation about Penn's plan to reduce its carbon footprint. With CSAP, which is the Climate and Sustainability Action Plan 3.0, Penn put a lot out there, and in the meantime has also fleshed some things out. And I hope that Penn, the administration of Penn, welcomes our contribution and our ongoing contributions and contributions from other members of the community. Bill, you have one very fast thing to say before I turn it over.
I was just going to say to Matt, who's asking the question, that there is the diagram which we didn't have time to show in this thing is going to be included in an update to the CSAP 3.0 that is just about to be issued by the university. So look in, if we don't see it sometime this week, look in there.
Right. And one quick other thing, Bill is leading a wonderful panel on how Penn faculty and staff can reduce their carbon footprint. That is on Friday. You'll find it in the Climate Week website. Osek, over to you.
All right. So thank you very much, Megan, Benjamin, Bill, Steve, Andy, Regina. Thank you so much for your insights in this panel. And of course, thank you, Simon, for moderating. Tomorrow, seminar panel, webinar, I should say, will focus on timber mass. So we're looking at construction as a way to reduce the effects of climate change. And if you're interested in this talk about carbon sequestration and capture, please join us on Friday, because Penn Engineering Professor Jennifer Wilcox will be talking about this and what she's doing locally here to capture carbon from the air. And having said that, I want to thank all of you for participating. So from all of us here at Penn Engineering, thank you so much. We hope to see you again tomorrow for the next webinar.
Thank you.